My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 32 years old, a mother of one, and until last year, I still believed that if I kept the peace long enough, my family would eventually see me the way I deserved to be seen. I was wrong. The moment that shattered that belief happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before my son turned 13, when my father looked me in the eyes and said, "You are not allowed to celebrate his birthday in this family." Not, "Please don't," not, "Let's compromise," not even, "We'll do something small." Allowed. As if my son's joy required permission, as if I was still a child myself, as if my brother's children who lived comfortably, loudly, and endlessly praised mattered more than my quiet, kind boy who had waited all year to feel special. And the reason? Because my brother's kids didn't feel comfortable celebrating when they weren't the center of attention. That was the day something ancient and heavy cracked open inside me. But before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you how that birthday ended and how it forced me to confront a truth I had spent my entire life avoiding, please pause for a second. If you've ever been the overlooked child, the responsible one, the one expected to sacrifice their happiness to keep the family balanced, I want you to stay with me. And if this story resonates, like, subscribe, and share it. You never know who needs to hear that they're not crazy for feeling this way. Because this didn't start with a birthday. It started decades earlier in a house where love was measured by convenience. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside a modern mid-sized city, the kind of place where everything looked perfect from the outside. Trim lawns, family dinners, a father who worked hard and demanded respect, a mother who learned early that survival meant silence, and my older brother, Daniel, the golden child. Daniel was 2 years older than me, athletic, confident, and loud in a way that filled rooms. From the moment he was born, my father adored him. Daniel could do no wrong. If he failed a test, the teacher was blamed. If he got into trouble, someone else must have provoked him. When he spoke, people listened. When I spoke, people sighed. I learned early to make myself smaller, to help without being asked, to not need too much. My father often praised me for being low maintenance, never realizing that what he was really praising was my ability to disappear. By the time I became a mother at 19, unexpectedly, painfully, and alone, my role was already cemented. I was the disappointment who tried to redeem herself by being useful. My son Ethan became both my heart and my shield. Everything I endured, I told myself, was worth it if it gave him stability. Daniel, on the other hand, married later, married well, and had 2 children within 3 years. Suddenly, the family revolved around them. Holidays were rescheduled for their convenience. Birthdays were combined so their kids wouldn't feel left out. Even my father's opinions softened around Daniel in ways I had never experienced. Still, I told myself not to compare. Comparison was poison. That's what I'd been taught. For 13 years, I did everything right. I showed up early, I left late, I paid my share, I kept my mouth shut. I let Ethan blow out candles on joint parties where his name was written smaller on the cake. I accepted hand-me-down traditions and leftover attention. But this year was different. 13 felt big. Ethan felt it too. He didn't ask for much, never did, but one night as we sat on his bed folding laundry, he looked at me with that careful hope children learn when they don't want to be disappointed and said, "Mom, do you think we could maybe do something just for my birthday this year?" Just for me? I said yes without hesitation. I promised him a small gathering, pizza, a cake he chose himself, a few friends. I even asked my parents if we could host it at their house since they had the space. That was my mistake. At first, my father didn't object. He nodded, distracted, flipping through mail. But 2 days later, he called me into his study. Daniel and Melissa were already there, sitting close together like a united front. My stomach tightened. "Sit down, Claire," my father said. That tone. the one that meant a verdict had already been reached. He cleared his throat and said, "We've talked about the birthday." We. Not I, not you and I. We. Melissa spoke first, her voice sweet but sharp underneath. The kids are feeling a bit uncomfortable about it being just Ethan. They don't understand why they can't be included. Daniel added, "You know how sensitive they are." Sensitive. I waited. Surely someone would say this was ridiculous, that Ethan belonged to the person being celebrated, that Ethan deserved one day. Instead, my father leaned back in his chair and said, "So we've decided it's best if you don't celebrate Ethan's birthday separately. Either it includes everyone or it doesn't happen here at all." I laughed at first, a soft, confused sound. "Dad, it's his 13th birthday." He frowned, and he deserves his own day. That's when my father's voice hardened. "You don't get to make decisions that disrupt this family's harmony." Harmony? I felt my hands shake. So my son's happiness disrupts harmony? Daniel shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak up. Melissa avoided my eyes. Then my father said the words that still echo in my head at night. "You are forbidden from celebrating his birthday in this family if it makes others feel less important." Forbidden. I stood up slowly, my chest burning, my throat tight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted someone, anyone, to say this wasn't normal. Instead, my father added, almost as an afterthought, "You should be grateful we let you stay involved at all." That was the moment I realized this was never about birthdays. It was about control. I left without arguing further. I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking. That night, Ethan asked me why my grandfather sounded angry on the phone earlier. I told him adults sometimes get confused about what matters. What I didn't tell him was that I had just made a decision that would change everything. Because as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying my father's words, something inside me whispered a truth I had avoided my entire life. If I obeyed this time, I always would. And what I did next, what I uncovered while trying to plan a birthday without their permission, would expose a betrayal far deeper than favoritism, one that involved money, lies, and a secret my father never meant for me to find. I couldn't sleep that night. Ethan lay in the next room, drifting off to the soft hum of his fan, completely unaware of the storm raging in his mother's heart. I traced my fingers over the edge of his blanket, trying to imagine how I could still make him feel special without giving my father and brother another excuse to undermine me. By morning, I had made a decision. If my family wouldn't allow me to celebrate Ethan's birthday, I would do it my way, quietly, cleverly, and somewhere they could never interfere. But before I could plan, a memory I had buried for years surfaced. The memory of another birthday, when I was 10. It was my 10th birthday, a milestone I had been looking forward to for months. I had begged my parents for a small party, maybe a cake with blue icing and candles shaped like stars. Daniel, of course, got the perfect party. Bouncy tassels, friends, and a dozen gifts stacked like a tower in our living room. For me, the party never happened. I remembered sitting on my bed that day, clutching a small, homemade card Daniel had forgotten to sign for me, tears blurring the words. My mother had come in, whispering, "Claire, it's fine. He's just bigger, more important. You'll understand when you're older." I had never understood. And now, 22 years later, the same lesson was being repeated with Ethan. That realization fueled me. I called my best friend Laura, who had always been my partner in crime through every unfair event in my life. "Laura," I said, my voice shaking with anger and suppressed tears, "I need your help. My father has forbidden me from celebrating Ethan's birthday. They don't care about him. They never have." Laura didn't even hesitate. "Then we'll make sure it happens anyway. Let's show them that your son is worth celebrating." Together, we started planning. I booked a small hall on the outskirts of town, invited Ethan's closest friends, and even arranged for a magician he had been dreaming about for months. Everything would be secret: emails, texts, and whispered conversations. Daniel and my parents would never know. But the more I planned, the more I felt a creeping anxiety. Deep down, I knew my father wouldn't let this slide. He had a way of sniffing out disobedience, of twisting the truth and using it as leverage to humiliate me. And then, as if on cue, the first crack appeared. It was a week before the birthday. I received a text from an unknown number. "Claire, cancel the party. We know everything. You know what happens if you defy your father." My hands went cold. I froze in the middle of the kitchen, staring at my phone. My first thought was Daniel, but he wouldn't risk his perfect life to threaten me directly. That left one possibility. My father had somehow found out, and now he was warning me. I tried calling him. No answer. I called Melissa. Silence. Panic started to creep in, but then I realized something important. Fear had controlled my life for too long. This was the moment I had to decide: submit again, or finally stand for my son and myself. The day of the birthday arrived. Ethan woke up oblivious to the tension I had endured all week. His excitement was contagious. I tried to focus on him, on his laughter, on the way his eyes lit up when he saw the magician. For a few hours, I allowed myself to breathe, to forget my father, Daniel, and Melissa. But nothing lasts forever. Just as the magician was finishing his last trick, the whole doors burst open. My father stood there, fuming, his face red, his hands gripping the doorframe like he was trying to physically hold the room together. Behind him were Daniel and Melissa, and worst of all, my mother, who would come, for reasons I couldn't yet understand, to side with them. "Claire, what is the meaning of this?" The room froze. Ethan's friends looked at me, wide-eyed, and Ethan clung to my arm, his cheeks pink from both excitement and fear. I just wanted Ethan to have his birthday," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "You knew this was forbidden. How dare you go behind our backs?" Before I could respond, Melissa chimed in, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Claire, you don't understand. This is about the children. Daniel's kids. They're upset you didn't consult them. You're selfish." I could feel the room closing in. The betrayal stung, but not just the words. It was the look on my mother's face, complicit, approving, proud even, that broke something inside me. I realized that the one person I had always trusted to protect me, to quietly defend me, was now part of the coalition that had humiliated me and my son in front of our friends. Ethan began to cry, not understanding why adults were so cruel about something as simple as his birthday. I knelt beside him, trying to shield him from their judgment, my own rage mixing with shame. And that's when I noticed something on my father's face, something that chilled me even more than his anger. There was a flicker of fear, something he wasn't telling me, something he was hiding from me. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about birthdays. It wasn't just about favoritism. There was something else, something he had been hiding from me my entire life, and it was connected to why I was never allowed to truly belong. I looked into his eyes and knew one thing for certain. I was about to uncover a secret that would shake our family to its core. And when I did, nothing would ever be the same. The moment my father stormed into the hall that day, something shifted inside me. Not just anger, though that was there, burning, but clarity. I realized I could no longer live in a house where my worth was measured by my brother's success and my son's comfort considered optional. I had to understand why my father treated me this way, and why my mother, who had always been my quiet ally, now looked at me with cold approval. The day after Ethan's birthday, I found myself sitting in my car outside the family home, heart racing, staring at the brick facade I had once thought of as safe. I didn't know where to begin. My father's words haunted me. You are forbidden. You don't get to make decisions that disrupt this family's harmony. Harmony. For them, harmony meant silence. My silence. Ethan's silence. I took a deep breath and called Laura. I need help, I admitted, my voice low. Not just with the party. I think there's more going on. Something about my father's behavior. He's hiding something. Laura didn't hesitate. Then let's dig. Let's find the truth. We started small, piecing together family history, looking through old documents, photographs, and letters I had kept from my childhood. Each discovery revealed patterns I had ignored for years. My father had always played favorites. My mother, instead of challenging it, had learned to reinforce it subtly. Daniel had always benefited, not because he was the better child, but because my parents wanted him to succeed where they felt I wouldn't. Then I found something that stopped me cold. An old letter tucked away in my childhood drawer, yellowed and fragile. It was from a law firm, addressed to my father. The contents were shocking. It detailed a trust fund and inheritance set aside for Daniel, explicitly excluding me. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was calculated. I had been deliberately cut out of opportunities my brother had been given without question. And Ethan, my own son, was being punished for daring to have joy in a family where legacy and control were sacred. My hands shook as I read. How could my father have done this? How could my mother have stayed silent? And why had I never discovered this before? I tried confronting my mother first. "Mom, did you know about this?" I asked, showing her the letter. Her eyes darted away. "Claire, it's complicated. You wouldn't understand." "Try me," I said, my voice firm. "Explain why my brother was given opportunities I never had, why you and Dad tried to control everything about my life, even my son's birthday." She sighed, finally lowering her eyes. I was afraid of your father, afraid of what he would do if anyone questioned him. I thought if I stayed quiet, at least no one would be hurt. But I see now, Claire, that I was wrong." I wanted to scream. "Wrong, Mom? Ethan's birthday was ruined. My son felt shamed because you and Dad decided his happiness didn't matter." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't argue. She just whispered, "I'm sorry, truly." That night, I went home with a mixture of fury, grief, and determination. The pieces were falling into place. My father's strict control, Daniel's golden child status, my mother's silent complicity. It all pointed to one thing: a family built on manipulation, secrecy, and selective love. But the deeper I dug, the more dangerous it became. Strange things started happening. My emails were hacked, my phone showed signs of surveillance, and anonymous texts continued to warn me. "Stop digging, Claire. Some truths are better left buried." I refused to stop. And then, in the most unexpected way, the final piece fell into my lap. It was a forgotten safe deposit key my mother had accidentally dropped while cleaning. I picked it up, curiosity piqued. I went to the bank, heart hammering, and opened the box. Inside were stacks of legal documents, wills, trust agreements, contracts, all confirming what I suspected. Daniel had been given everything. My father had legally prevented me from receiving anything. And more than that, buried beneath the paperwork was a letter addressed to me in my father's handwriting. It wasn't just cold, it was cruel. It read, "Claire, you are too soft, too sentimental. The world is cruel, and you are not prepared. I cannot allow you to have what Daniel will inherit. Learn your place." I couldn't breathe. I held the letter in my shaking hands, tears streaming down my face. Not just for me, but for Ethan. For the fact that my father had tried to teach me from birth that I was never enough. And that's when it hit me. The next betrayal was coming. I didn't know who it would be from or in what form, but one thing was certain. My family would fight to keep these secrets buried, and they would stop at nothing to maintain control. And that's when I realized something terrifying. If I wanted to protect Ethan and finally take my life back, I had to fight the entire system they had built against me, even if it meant losing the people I once loved. The next morning, I woke up feeling both terrified and unstoppable. The documents I had uncovered weren't just papers. They were proof that for my entire life, I had been deliberately sidelined. And now, finally, I could see the path forward. But that path wasn't going to be easy. My father and Daniel were clever, manipulative, and unafraid to use family loyalty as a weapon. I knew I had to confront them. I had to make them face the consequences of their choices, not just for me, but for Ethan. So I called Daniel and asked him to meet me at a neutral location, a small cafe halfway between our homes. He agreed immediately, his tone sweet and calm, giving no hints that he already knew I had discovered the truth. As I walked into the cafe, my hands wrapped tightly around the folder containing all the documents, I spotted him sitting at a corner table, scrolling on his phone. He looked up, smiled, and said, "Claire, it's good to see you." I didn't return his smile. Instead, I sat down and placed the folder on the table. "Daniel, it's time we talk," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline racing through me. "About the trust, the inheritance, everything your father has kept from me." His smile faltered just slightly. "Claire, you don't understand. You're overreacting. Father made decisions for a reason. You've always been too emotional to handle these matters." I opened the folder and began laying out the documents one by one, wills, contracts, letters, all showing that Daniel had been given preferential treatment while I had been deliberately excluded. Overreacting? Daniel, look at this. These are legal documents. This isn't opinion, this is fact. All of my life, you were handed everything, while I was told to stay in my place. And now, my son was denied a birthday because of this pattern of favoritism. Do you understand? His face tightened. "Claire, you're twisting things. This isn't about Ethan's birthday. That was a misunderstanding. You're trying to create conflict where none exists." I leaned forward, my voice rising, though I kept control. "A misunderstanding? Daniel, my son's birthday was ruined. My father forbid me from celebrating him. And now you're acting like none of this matters? How long have you and Dad been manipulating our lives like this?" Daniel's eyes darted around, searching for some escape, some way to maintain his calm facade. And then he made a mistake, one of many that day. "Claire, you don't know the whole story. There are things you'll never understand about Father. You weren't meant to have certain knowledge. That's why what?" I interrupted. "Because I was soft, sentimental, too emotional? Because I wasn't Daniel?" He flinched, and I saw it, a crack in his armor. But I wasn't done. I needed the truth, no matter how ugly. I needed him to confess everything he had hidden, every way my father had lied, and every betrayal he had silently participated in. Then, just as I was about to ask the question I had rehearsed for weeks, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Leave it alone, Claire, or you'll regret it." I felt the familiar chill of fear. My father was watching, I realized. He was already aware of what I had found and was trying to intimidate me. But I refused to back down. Ethan deserved better, and I deserved to reclaim my life. I looked back at Daniel. This isn't about fear. This is about justice, for me and for my son. For a moment, Daniel's face softened. I thought I had reached him. But then he did something I didn't expect. He leaned across the table, voice low, almost a whisper. "Claire, you're making a huge mistake. Do you know what father is capable of? He's not just going to sit there and let you destroy everything he's built. You could lose everything. Ethan could lose you." The words hit me like a punch. He wasn't just warning me, he was manipulating me, trying to plant doubt and fear. My own brother, the man I thought I could trust, was standing in the way of my truth. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to breathe. "I'm not afraid, Daniel. Not anymore. I've spent my whole life afraid, but not today. I will protect my son and I will hold my father accountable." That's when the real shock came. Daniel's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced, then froze. I didn't see the screen, but I knew immediately it was a message from my father, and the tone of panic in Daniel's face said everything. Then, with deliberate calm, I slid the folder closer to him. "If you're going to be part of this, Daniel, now is the time to choose. You can side with truth or continue hiding behind lies. But know this, I'm not stepping back." He swallowed hard, his face pale, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of fear. Not fear for himself, but fear of what I was about to do. The documents I held weren't just paper, they were power. And now I was no longer the powerless sister I had been my entire life. Before Daniel could respond, the cafe doors opened again. My father stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room, landing on me. His face was a mask of fury, but there was something else there too, uncertainty. The storm I had predicted had arrived, and this time I wasn't alone. Ethan deserved the life I was ready to fight for, and nothing, no threat, no manipulation, no betrayal was going to stop me. But what I didn't know yet was that my father had one final weapon, one last secret he had never intended for me to uncover. And when that secret came to light, it would change everything I thought I knew about my family and force me to make a choice I wasn't sure I was ready for. The day after the confrontation with Daniel, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's little face, the way his smile had faded the moment my father stormed into his birthday celebration. That smile had always been my anchor, my reason to endure the cruelty of a family that seemed incapable of love without strings attached. And now, it felt like the very thing I had fought to protect had been almost stolen from him. I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stop here. My father's words and Daniel's manipulation were just the surface. There had to be a reason he was so determined to control everything. Why he had cut me out legally. Why my son had to be punished for daring to want happiness. And deep down, I had a gut feeling that whatever it was buried somewhere I wasn't supposed to find it. So I began retracing old family files, photos, and letters. I spent hours in the attic sifting through boxes my mother had long insisted were sentimental nonsense. Among the faded birthday cards and school awards, I found something curious. A leather-bound journal, thick with dust. The cover had my father's initials. I hesitated before opening it. If this was what I thought it could change everything. Taking a deep breath, I flipped it open and started reading. The entries weren't ordinary reflections. They were confessions, calculations, plans. And at the bottom of one page, I read a line that made my heart stop. "Claire must never know the truth about her birth. She is to be guided by her brother's example. If she questions it, the consequences must be swift." My hands shook. My birth. Something about it had been hidden. That explained my father's relentless favoritism, the way he had controlled my life, the cruel decisions that had kept me always one step behind Daniel. And suddenly, a memory I had buried for decades surfaced. My mother whispering to me one night when I was 8, "Claire, some things are better left unknown." The journal contained dates, legal notations, and even letters to unnamed lawyers, documents that proved my father had intentionally concealed critical information about my birth. Something about inheritance, about legitimacy, about why Daniel had always been preferred. I felt sick. My father hadn't just controlled my childhood or Ethan's birthday, he had orchestrated an entire life for me, a life where I was never supposed to feel fully equal or entitled. And now I realized the magnitude of what this secret meant. It wasn't just about money or favoritism. It was about identity, about truth, about the right to exist without being deemed inferior from birth. I couldn't process it all at once, but I knew I had to act. I couldn't confront him blindly, not yet. I needed proof, a plan, and a witness, someone who could help me navigate the labyrinth of lies that had defined my family. Laura was the first person I called. "Laura, I found it," I said, my voice trembling. "A journal, proof that my father has been hiding everything. My birth, my rights, my place in this family. And Ethan, he's being punished for it." Laura's pause on the other end of the line told me everything. She knew this was serious. "Claire, you need to be careful. If your father finds out you have that journal, he'll do anything to stop you." "I know," I whispered, "but I can't wait anymore. I have to confront him, Laura. I need to know the truth directly from him. Ethan deserves that much. I deserve that much." We made a plan. Laura would come with me for support. We would confront my father at his office, a place where he had always been untouchable, where he ruled with authority and intimidation. But this time, I wasn't going in to beg. I wasn't going to shrink. I was going in armed with the evidence of decades of manipulation and deceit. The day of the confrontation, I felt a mixture of dread and empowerment. As we drove to his office, I rehearsed every word, every question I needed answered. The moment we arrived, my father's secretary gave us a wary glance, sensing the tension radiating off me like a storm cloud. He was waiting in his office, as I had expected, calm on the surface, but tense underneath. Daniel wasn't there this time, and Melissa had been kept away, probably a calculated move by my father to control the narrative. "Claire," he said, his voice deceptively smooth, "I hear you have questions." I didn't respond immediately. I placed the journal and folder of documents on his desk. "Yes, I do," I said, my voice steady. "I know about the inheritance, the favoritism, and now I know the truth you've hidden about my birth. I want answers. All of them." For a moment, he was silent. Then he smiled. Not a comforting smile, but a calculating one. The smile of a man who had always believed he was untouchable. "You think you're ready for the truth, Claire? You have no idea what you're asking for." "I'm ready," I said, gripping the folder tighter. "I deserve to know. Ethan deserves the truth about the family he was born into." My father leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Very well," he said, "but be warned. Some truths are not just shocking, they are dangerous, and once you know them, there's no going back." I swallowed hard, but nodded. "I understand. I want the truth anyway." And then, for the first time in my life, my father told me something I could never have anticipated. Something so staggering, it changed everything I thought I knew about my family, my father, and even my own identity. It wasn't just about favoritism, manipulation, or inheritance. It was a secret that, if revealed to anyone else, would destroy reputations, upend lives, and shatter the delicate balance of power my father had maintained for decades. And when he revealed it, I realized I'd been living in a carefully constructed illusion my entire life. A lie that wasn't just about control, it was about my very existence. I remember the sound of the clock in my father's office more than his voice at first. Tick, tick, tick. Each second stretched out, heavy, like it knew something I didn't yet understand. Laura sat beside me, silent, her presence steadying, but my father didn't look at her. His eyes stayed locked on mine, sharp and assessing, as if he were measuring how much damage the truth was about to do and whether I could survive it. "You've always asked the wrong questions, Claire," he said finally. "You asked why Daniel was favored, why you were excluded, why your son doesn't fit into this family's plans." My stomach tightened. "Then answer the right one," I said. "Why?" He stood up and walked toward the window, his back to me. For the first time, he looked old, smaller, not the towering authority figure who had controlled my life, but a man weighed down by his own choices. "You were never meant to inherit anything," he said quietly. "Not because you're incapable, but because acknowledging you fully would have exposed something I worked very hard to bury." I felt my pulse in my ears. "Expose what?" He turned around. "You are not my biological daughter." The words landed without sound, like something exploding underwater. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My chest tightened so fast I thought I might pass out. "That's not possible," I whispered. "You raised me." "Yes," he said, "I raised you, but I did not create you." Laura inhaled sharply beside me. My father continued, his voice cold now, almost rehearsed. "Your mother was pregnant when I met her, another man's child. A mistake, a liability. I agreed to stay on the condition that it never threatened my name, my legacy, or my bloodline." My hands shook violently. "So what was I asked. "A favor? A secret?" "You were a complication," he said, "one I managed." Every memory suddenly rewired itself in my mind. The distance, the rules, the favoritism, the way Daniel was protected while I was corrected. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough. I was never supposed to count. "And Ethan?" I demanded. "Why punish him?" His jaw tightened. "Because he is proof that you exist outside my control, a reminder of a mistake that didn't disappear the way it was supposed to." I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You tried to erase me," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "My entire life, you tried to erase me." "I protected what mattered," he snapped. "What mattered to you?" I shot back. "Not what mattered to me, not what mattered to my son." For the first time, I saw fear flicker across his face. Not regret, fear. "You will not take this outside this family," he said sharply. "You will not destroy everything I've built." "Built on lies," I said, "on control, on humiliation." He leaned forward. "If this comes out, you lose more than I do." That's when I realized the truth. He wasn't warning me out of concern. He was threatening me. I left his office shaking, Laura practically holding me upright. Outside, the air felt too bright, too loud. The world had gone on spinning while my entire identity had been quietly rewritten in a single conversation. That night, I sat on my bed while Ethan slept in the next room. I watched him breathe, peaceful and unaware, and something inside me hardened, not into bitterness, but resolute. I would not let him grow up feeling unwanted. I would not let him learn silence the way I had. I would not let him believe love was conditional. The next morning, I did something my father never expected. I told my mother I knew everything. She didn't deny it. She didn't argue. She broke down in tears, sobbing the kind of grief that comes from decades of swallowed truth. "I thought I was protecting you," she said. "I thought staying meant survival." "No," I said gently. "Staying meant surrender." And for the first time, I didn't ask her to choose me. I chose myself. I met with a lawyer. I documented everything: the journal, the letters, the threats, not for revenge, but for protection, for boundaries, for Ethan. I didn't expose my father publicly, not yet. What I did was quieter, stronger. I cut contact. No more holidays, no more apologies, no more begging for space that should have been mine by birth or by love. When my father called, angry, then pleading, I didn't answer. When Daniel sent messages pretending concern, I didn't respond. And when Ethan asked why we didn't visit Grandpa anymore, I told him the truth in a way a child could understand. "Sometimes," I said, "loving someone means walking away from people who hurt you." He nodded, and then he smiled. That smile, the real one, told me everything. I wasn't forbidden anymore. I was free. The first morning after I cut contact with my father and Daniel felt surreal. The silence in our home was heavy but comforting, like the calm after a storm. For the first time in my life, I woke up without that familiar knot of dread in my stomach, the constant worry that someone would belittle me, punish me, or manipulate me again. Ethan was asleep beside me, his little chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. I watched him for a long moment, thinking about how close we had come to losing more than just a birthday. The days that followed were both liberating and terrifying. On one hand, I was free to plan our lives without the weight of my father's judgment or Daniel's sneering presence. I signed the papers with the lawyer, documenting the inheritance documents, the letters, and the threats. It wasn't just about reclaiming what had been denied, it was about protecting Ethan from a pattern of control that had nearly stolen his innocence. On the other hand, the absence of my family left a hollow ache I hadn't anticipated. Holidays were quieter. Conversations with extended family were now strained or non-existent. I realized that freedom came with a cost, but I also realized that cost was far less than the lifelong suffering I would have endured if I continued obeying them. One afternoon, as Ethan and I baked cupcakes in our tiny kitchen, just the two of us, we laughed so hard that the flour on his nose seemed to sparkle in the sunlight. He looked up at me, eyes wide, full of trust and love, and said, "Mom, can we have a birthday next week? Just us. Pizza, cupcakes, and the magician again." I smiled through tears I didn't try to hide. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll celebrate however you want. No one can stop us now." It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. I realized something essential in that moment. Happiness wasn't about grand parties or approval from people who had never valued me. It was about creating a space where we felt safe, loved, and celebrated, even if it meant standing alone. But as I began to heal, old patterns tried to sneak back. My father sent letters, cautiously worded but dripping with control. "I hope you will reconsider your choices. Think about family." Daniel reached out through messages, apologizing in a tone meant to guilt me. "I wish things could go back to how they were, Claire. I miss my niece and nephew being part of your life." I read them once, felt the familiar sting, and then put them aside. No explanations, no justifications. I had learned the hardest lesson of my life. Boundaries weren't negotiable when your well-being was at stake. I also realized healing wasn't linear. Some nights I cried for the sister I had never truly had, for the mother who hadn't been able to stand up sooner, for the father I had once idolized, but who had systematically tried to erase me. But in those tears, I also found clarity. I was no longer a victim. I was a mother, a woman, and a human capable of reclaiming joy despite the betrayals that had shaped my life. Then an unexpected moment of empowerment arrived. I started writing, not to expose anyone publicly, but to document my story, to reflect, and to turn trauma into strength. Each word on the page felt like a reclaiming of the life my father had tried to dictate, and slowly I realized the full depth of what I had learned. Love isn't measured by permission, happiness isn't earned through approval, and identity cannot be stolen without consent. Ethan thrived in this environment of safety and truth. For the first time, he understood the importance of his own voice. He began school projects with confidence, made new friends, and even took the lead in family gatherings with our relatives who respected our boundaries. Watching him grow reminded me why every battle, every tear, and every sleepless night had been worth it. One evening, as we sat on our porch watching the sunset paint the sky with gold and crimson, Ethan hugged me tightly. "Mom, I'm glad it's just us now. I like it better this way." I hugged him back, feeling a profound sense of peace. Me too, baby. Me too. But even in moments of peace, I knew vigilance was necessary. Family dynamics don't dissolve overnight. The risk of manipulation and intrusion remained. Yet now, I faced them with courage rather than fear, clarity rather than confusion, and boundaries that were unbreakable. I realized something else, too. By reclaiming my life, I had also reclaimed myself. Claire Bennett, the daughter once silenced, the mother once silenced, the woman once forbidden from celebrating her own child, had finally emerged, strong, whole, and unafraid. And as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, I understood the truth of my journey. Forgiveness was possible, but it didn't require reconciliation. Healing didn't mean returning to the people who had hurt me. It meant returning to myself. For the first time, I wasn't surviving the shadows of my father's control. I was living in the light of my own freedom. Weeks passed and our lives settled into a rhythm that felt like a balm to my soul. Ethan and I were no longer living in the shadow of my father's control. Our days were full of laughter, learning, and small joys, a quiet revolution of freedom I had fought so hard to create. Yet, even in this newfound peace, I knew that true healing required more than just physical distance. It required confronting my own pain, understanding it, and learning to live beyond it. I began therapy, tentatively at first, sitting in that quiet room pouring out decades of neglect, favoritism, and hidden secrets. I felt emotions I had pushed down for so long come roaring to the surface. Anger, sadness, fear. But alongside them, something unexpected emerged. Empowerment. I realized that every barrier my father had placed in front of me, every insult and humiliation, had inadvertently prepared me to stand tall now. Therapy wasn't just about processing the past. It was about building a future. I learned to recognize when manipulation tried to creep back in, even from distant family. I learned to assert myself with clarity, without guilt. And I discovered that boundaries weren't walls, they were bridges to self-respect and safety. Ethan thrived alongside me. We celebrated small milestones with intention: a Saturday movie night, homemade ice cream sundaes, a trip to the park where he could run and laugh without fear of judgment. Each moment was a reaffirmation of what my father had tried to suppress: love, joy, and freedom. One evening, as we were tidying up after dinner, Ethan looked up at me with those wide, curious eyes and asked, "Mom, will Grandpa ever change? Will he ever be nice to us?" I paused. The question stung, not because I didn't love my father, but because I had finally accepted the truth. Some people never change. Some people cling to control and cruelty, no matter how much you hope otherwise. I knelt to meet Ethan's gaze and said softly, "Some people can't be trusted to change, but that's okay, baby. We have each other, and that's what matters." He smiled, a pure, unburdened smile, and ran off to grab his favorite book. I watched him go, a profound sense of pride swelling in me. In protecting him, I had also protected myself. Then came a moment that solidified my transformation. My mother called unexpectedly. She wanted to see Ethan, to apologize, and perhaps to rebuild a small bridge. I listened quietly as she spoke, then made a decision that surprised even me. I appreciate your apology, Mom, but right now we need space. We're building a life where Ethan and I can feel safe. When you're ready to respect that, then we can talk. Until then, we're moving forward without trying to mend what's broken. It was firm but compassionate, a line drawn in the sand, without bitterness. And for the first time, I realized that love didn't always require forgiveness or closeness. It could simply be recognition of the truth and protection of what mattered most. Life continued, and with it came small victories that felt monumental. Ethan excelled in school, made new friends, and embraced his uniqueness. I started a small online business, something I had always dreamed of but never pursued because my family's control had left little room for ambition. Each success, each smile, each quiet moment of peace was a testament to resilience, to reclaiming the life that was always meant to be mine. Looking back, I understood the cruel lesson my father had tried to teach me all those years, that I was powerless, that my voice didn't matter, that my happiness was negotiable. But in rejecting that lesson, I had discovered something far more powerful. My voice, my choices, and my joy could never be taken from me unless I allowed it. And so, in a small apartment filled with the scent of baked goods and the sound of Ethan's laughter, I finally felt whole. Not because my family had changed, not because the past was erased, but because I had finally claimed my life. The scars remain, yes, they always will, but they no longer define me. They remind me that I survived, that I fought, and that I am free. Claire Bennett, once silenced, once forbidden, once betrayed, now lives fully, unapologetically, and with her son's laughter as the soundtrack to her reclaimed life. Have you ever had to stand up to your family for your own happiness or your child's? How did it feel to reclaim your life? Share your story in the comments. We can all learn from each other's strength.